Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altuhu sahla wa anta taj'al al-hazana idha shi'ta sahla. So inshallah we'll continue with our weekly series, and we are on hadith number 32, inshallah. And this one's a much shorter hadith, so inshallah we should finish on 11:20, like I'm done. Inshallah we'll have Q&A after that. So the hadith is as follows. عن أبي سعيد سعد بن مالك بن سنان الخدري رضي الله عنه أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لا ضرر ولا ضرار حديث حسن رواه ابن ماجه والدارقطني وغيرهما مسندا. On the authority of Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, there should be neither harming, darar, and there should be nor reciprocating harm, which is dirar. And to understand this hadith, first of all, I want to explain the meaning of the word darar and then compare that with the word dirar. So first, darar is in reference to harming someone else. So you harming someone else, this is darar. And then dirar is where the other person responds with harming you back. So to give an example, let's say, for example, you harm your neighbor. Like let's say you are, let's say you have a garden in the back of your house, and maybe like you're mowing the lawn or whatever, and you do something to their lawn. So you're harming your neighbor, and then in response, your neighbor responds and let's say does something back, or like retaliates back. So Rasulullah is making very clear to us here that this is something that's haram and shouldn't be done in Islam. So the conclusion is prohibition of inflicting any type of harm to oneself or others, either for getting a benefit or not. So even if there's a certain benefit in me harming someone else, or there's a certain benefit in me responding back with harm, this is not allowed in Islam. And one should not inflict harm to others in response to them harming him. So again, we shouldn't do that. And then this is something that again is prohibited, it's haram, right? But now I want to get into how Ibn Rajab obviously explains and breaks down the categories of harm in Islam into two categories mainly. The first one is acts that are only meant to bring about harm to others, such as killing or hitting someone or insulting. Again, its only goal out of it is just to hurt someone, right? Again, it's not a place where Sharia says in this situation you should be harming someone. Like for example, if you're at the battlefield, then of course you wouldn't take this hadith and say, oh, clearly it says la darar, we shouldn't be harming anyone else, so clearly we're not going to fight. No, of course not. In this context, Sharia obliges you to fight, right? So this is talking about outside those situations. So it's saying these acts that are like for example, killing someone or hitting someone or insulting someone, making fun of them, etc. The goal of it is just to hurt someone else, right? That is haram. And that's the first category that Ibn Rajab explains. And he says this is an act of evil and prohibited in Islam. Indeed, one cannot imagine a true believer doing such a deed to his brother in Islam. And now the second category, which dives more deeper into the differences of opinion between the four schools, is acts that are beneficial to one and harmful to another, such as building a factory in a populated area, which might cause, for example, ecological disaster, or it might affect someone else, like put someone out of business, etc., or something along those lines, right? And different schools of fiqh explain their opinions on this topic. So Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali, and Shafi'i. And I'm not going to get into all four different opinions because that's a much longer discussion, and it's kind of out of our scope for today. But if anyone wants to know, you can ask inshallah in the Q&A, we'll go over it. But what I did want to focus on today and have most of our commentary on this hadith focus on is one of the Sharia principles, and we'll focus on one obviously. One of the Sharia principles that are derived from this hadith. So among the derivations of Sharia principles, there's almost 10 of them from this one hadith. The fifth one is one that we've probably heard before. A greater harm can be removed by lesser harm. And we've probably heard it in two different ways. For example, the first one, if one has no other options, you should take the lesser of two evils. We've probably heard of that one before. Or the other one, if there's a conflict between two evils, then precedence, or you should take the one that is avoiding the bigger evil, or the evil that is avoiding the bigger harm. So this kind of Sharia principle, I want to focus most of our commentary today on this idea. So what I want to focus on is the fact that, for example, this is the correct application of the Sharia principle, and then I'll explain some misapplications and like what that applies to. So let's say for example, someone's injured and they're physically incapable of doing sujood, right? For example, let's say they have knee surgery and they can't do sujood, right? If they do sujood, then obviously they'll break their knee or whatever, right? So in this case, this Sharia principle applies, right? Because the person can do sujood, he can physically, it's possible. It's not that it's impossible, but there's a greater harm in him doing that. So in that case, he's allowed to pray while sitting or standing, etc. So based on the different circumstances, right? So this is an application or a correct application of this like you can call it legal maxim or Sharia principle. And to give another very common example, let's say you're in a situation where it's survival, it's life or death, and you have a choice in some situation where your only choice is either to starve to death or you have, for example, pork in front of you. Pork is haram, right? And in this scenario, this principle says, okay, avoiding the bigger harm, which is death, you're allowed to eat pork. But again, when you do eat, you only eat the minimum need to survive. So you only eat the minimum amount of pork, which is haram, need to survive. And there's two key points about this I want to touch on. So number one, this situation, it doesn't change the hukm shari, which is the Sharia rule. The Sharia rule does not change in the situation because you ate pork. Pork did not become halal for the 5 minutes that you ate it, and then it went back to being haram. Rather, the fact that you're not held accountable is what's happened now. Now, whether you're sinful or not, that's what changed, but the Sharia rule stays the same. And this is a very important principle to understand, that the Sharia rule does not change. It doesn't change. So pork is still haram. Even when you're eating it, and you're not sinful when you're eating it, it's still haram. Sharia still says it's haram, but in this situation, you can call it a rukhsa, you have an ijaza, you have like the ability, you're allowed to eat it without being sinful, right? This is a very important concept, number one. And then number two is the fact that this applies in a situation where you have no other option. No other option. So it's either, we said life, like you survive by eating the pork, or it's death, right? There is no other option. There's no option of, for example, I might be able to ask for some food, I might get it in a halal way. Or if I continue to travel a little bit more, I might find some other food over there, and I'll get the halal way. There is absolutely no other option. No other option. That is the only circumstance, the only circumstance where this hadith applies, or where this Sharia principle applies. And again, this is like the theoretical aspect of it, right? And sometimes, for example, we might misapply Sharia principle, and you might take it and give it precedence over the hukm shari. So what does that mean exactly? To give you a tangible example, right? Let's say, and again, this is a commentary for myself. Let's say we're looking at the idea of, for example, you could say voting in Islam, or you could say something that is normally haram, but we're in a situation where you're forced to pick between two evils, right? Number one, again, we have to decide between, is there a third choice or no? If there isn't, then we have to pick between these two evils, yes, right? So for example, the issue of voting, sometimes some people might come and say, okay, we have to pick the lesser of two evils. We have to pick between these two options of this candidate or that candidate, we have to pick the one who will harm the Muslims the least. Or for example, towards the issue of Gaza, people are saying abandon Biden, right? Because Biden's the one who initiated, etc., supported the Zionist entity, so therefore we should abandon Biden and vote for the other one. And there's a lesser evil, even though both of them are bad, you don't want either one, but there's a lesser evil in voting for one or the other. So again, we have to look at the conditions of this principle we just talked about over here and see, does it actually apply, right? Is there a third option other than voting for Biden or the other candidate? Is there a third option? If there is, then we have to take that option. And this is something that we have very clear in our heads, that the hukm shari in this context, the Sharia law, or what we're supposed to do in this context, is take that third option. This principle doesn't come and make everything halal for us that's evil, and all we have to do is just pick the lesser evil, right? Everything we do, there's another principle. It's called al-asl fi al-af'al at-taqayyud fi hukm al-shari', which means like the original, or for actions, the baseline for actions is imitating the hukm shari', is following the hukm shari', right? So normally, before you do an action, the default before you do an action is you check to see in Sharia, is this halal or haram? In Sharia, is this halal or haram? Right? This is the norm, this is the default. Now again, in these extreme situations where you have no other choice, it's survival, or for example, you eat pork, right? That's where this rule applies. This principle comes in of lesser of two evils. So we have to be very careful when applying this principle of the lesser of two evils, or not harming, etc. Pick the lesser harm, because if we apply it in an incorrect context, then we're giving it precedence over what? Over the normal default, which is following what the Sharia says, what Quran and Sunnah says, right? And again, this is something we have to internalize, because when we say we follow Quran and Sunnah, that means that for everything in our lives, we want to see what Islam says about it and then follow that. Whereas sometimes, for example, if we take this principle and kind of run with it, right, we might end up in somewhere very far that Islam 100%, we know if we take a step back and zoom out, Islam does not allow this, but because we took this principle and ran with it, we got somewhere very far. Like to give an example, if for example, we say that the lesser, like for example, if you take the society and you take how like hypersexualized societies, etc. So some might come and say, okay, using this principle to avoid zina among the youth, we're going to allow free mixing. We're going to allow you to talk to opposite gender, etc. And it's normal, and we'll facilitate an environment for that. And the argument is this is the lesser of two evils. The lesser of two evils is that in this situation, at least in this environment, it's a controlled environment where you can control it and it won't lead to zina. But if we leave it, then it might lead to zina. And someone might take this rule, this principle, and obviously incorrectly, very incorrectly, apply it and say this is the lesser of two evils. I'm creating an environment to avoid zina, which is a righteous cause, right? I'm trying to do something that's good for the Muslims, right? But again, in this situation, is there only two options? Is this the only option that you have? Is to make this extreme of creating an environment where you're allowing the haram, you're making the haram halal? Is this the only option? Now, obviously, with that example, it's a very far example. Of course not. It doesn't make sense, right? But see how when we take this principle and misapply it, how far we can go. We can end up somewhere where we're making the haram halal if we take this principle and apply it in this extreme way, right? So again, to summarize, it's a very short hadith, but to summarize, number one, before we do any action, check the hukum shari for it, of course with a scholar, right? Check what the Sharia say. Does Quran and Sunnah say, yes, I should do that, or no, I shouldn't do that? Is this halal, is this haram? That's the default. Now, if you're in a situation where, you're in a situation where there's no other option and you're forced to pick between two things, then again, this principle tells you that you have the rukhsa, you have you're allowed to do this one action as lesser of an evil versus the other one. But again, it doesn't mean it's halal. This action is still haram, but inshallah you won't be sinful for it. So again, that's just a quick commentary on the hadith I wanted to add. And again, the hadith is la darara wa la dirar, and there's much more like deeper in terms of fiqh commentary we can go on it, but it's not in the scope of today's discussion. Again, the translation of the hadith is there should be neither harming, darar, nor reciprocating harm, dirar. And that's hadith for today, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen wa jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We can have Q&A right now, inshallah, if you have questions. It can be about any of the examples.